Hi guys, so we're back in Virginia Civics and Economics, and we're in Chapter 5, Section 3, Part 1. We're doing this in two parts because this section talks about, what is actually in the Constitution, and it's just so big that I didn't want to bore you with 40 minutes of video. And if you have the textbook, you can follow along with it. So the SOL standards are up there. Please feel free to pause the video and read them if you would like. Vocabulary in this section are amendments, federalism, concurrent powers, reserved powers, checks and balances, and impeach. So amendments, what it means is included in the Constitution of the United States are instructions on how to make changes to it or to make amendments to it, to add on to it. So amendments are additions to what was written in the Constitution. Our add-ons are things that add things to it. Federalism means the division of power between the states and the federal or national government. We'll talk about this a little bit more down the road, but people consider that the federalism in America can be either thought of as layer cake federalism or marble cake federalism. And with layer cake, just like in a layered cake, there's no sort of mixing between layers. The white layer doesn't go into the black layer, and the black layer doesn't go into the white layer. And that idea is that the federal government, the national government, doesn't really sort of meld into the state government, and their roles don't sort of intermix in a swirly pattern. Marble cake federalism is sort of that swirly pattern that, the federal government does stuff in the states that and takes stuff that and does roles in the states that the states normally are primarily control of. And the idea also is that the states sort of intermix with the federal government as well, and that the reality of federalism, the division of power between states and the national government, is more messy than it is clean, like a layer cake. Concurrent powers are powers shared by the federal government and state governments. For example, both can tax and both can create laws. Reserved powers are reserved powers that are only given to the states. So basically, it's what can the states do without too much federal government control. So one of the things they can do is education. There is a little mixing of the federal government, but states are primarily responsible for education. So if you have a problem with what you're being taught in school, what we're focusing on, or standardized testing, or anything like that, you got to talk to your state. Federal government, how it reacts to this is they realize that states are primarily responsible for education. It is a reserved power for the state. So all the federal government can really do is offer money to the states for, doing certain things. States are also responsible for law enforcement. So checks and balances are ways we give each branch ways to limit the powers of the other two. So if you take a moment and pause this video, you should be able to sort of look at this picture to your right and see some of the ways each branch in our national government checks the power of the other two or limits the power of the other two. So the executive branch, for example, can limit Congress's power because they can veto Congress on certain laws. The president or executive branch can also call special sessions of Congress to limit Congress's power. So that's a way, Obama can make sure that the Republicans in the House and Senate don't sort of pass whatever law they want to pass. It's a way the executive checks the power of Congress. Finally, impeach. It's a way the House of Representatives checks the power of the presidency. So basically what happens is the House of Representatives impeaches or accuses the president or other officials of wrongdoing, but they don't try the president. The president gets a trial in the Senate. So they don't get the decision to remove the president. The Senate does. Where are we now? We've heard the story of how we as America created our current government through creating the United States Constitution. Remember, we talked about the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists, the debate between both of them, some of the ideas that went into the Constitution, some of the history that framed the Constitution's creation. And now we're going to talk about what's actually in it. So part one, this part, is the preamble of the Constitution. We're focusing narrowly on that because it's a SOL concept. Part two is the rest of the Constitution and certain attributes or features of it. So influences on the Constitution before we begin. We just need to state that when we went to Jamestown, that group of people that went to Jamestown was part of the Virginia Company of London, and this company in their charter to create Jamestown, the king wanted this company to guarantee the rights of Englishmen, to basically say to these colonists, you have the rights that you had when you were back in Britain. Also, there was a Virginia Declaration of Rights that served as a model for the Bill of Rights of this Constitution. So on the screen you can see the organization. There's preamble, Article 1 through 7, and the Bill of Rights. That's how the Constitution is organized. So what I want you guys to do is to read this slide and memorize it on your own. So pause this slide and memorize it. It's on the SOL, so you need to know everything in it. So also what you need to know about the preamble is that this was written and put in the Constitution specifically to express why these founders, these writers of the Constitution wrote this. It was also, there's a section called We the People in the Constitution, in this preamble. Remember, it goes, we the people of the United States in order to establish a more perfect union, if you had memorized it. And this section is basically establishing that the power of this new government comes from the people. And so this is another example of consent of the governed. Preamble's purpose is to state the goals of our government. So on the screen are the sections of the preamble, and if you had memorized the preamble like I asked you to, these would come right out to you. So to form a more perfect union, this start, the founders were basically saying, we didn't like what happened because of the Articles of Confederation. These Articles of Confederation were not good. It was an alliance between states, for sure. It's an alliance between all these new American states, but they didn't function well. This alliance didn't function well. This union of states didn't function well. So the founders were like, we're writing this, we're doing this Constitution to make it better, to form a more perfect union of states. To establish justice, these founders, these writers of the Constitution were putting this in the preamble to basically say we have a legal system now that seeks fair ways to settle disputes between individuals and governments, and between states and between national government and states. So they were basically saying part of the problems of the Articles of Confederation was that before we couldn't resolve these disputes. If someone, committed a crime in New York and lived in Virginia, then we had no way to resolve that dispute between New York and Virginia. So we need to create this Constitution in order to be able to resolve that dispute. To ensure domestic tranquility, these founders, these writers of the Constitution were basically saying, we want to ensure that people in their daily lives have peaceful, tranquil daily lives. And, we need to write this Constitution in part to do that. So for this slide, the founders provide for the common defense. Because if you remember back into the Articles of Confederation and Shays' Rebellion and stuff like that, one of the problems was that we couldn't send soldiers to Massachusetts defense. We couldn't stop Shays' Rebellion because New York wasn't willing to give its soldiers to Massachusetts. And the idea was by forming a more perfect union, we make this process much easier. And to promote the general welfare, what that means is that they wrote this Constitution in part to promote all y'all's welfare. So my welfare, your welfare, the neighbor's welfare, the person down the street's welfare. This Constitution was intended to make everybody happier, to make the nation happier. And to promote, that idea of giving to each other, that idea that, what's happening in your neighbor's life matters. And finally, this section of to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, they wrote this in there because they were trying to say we all in this country have the freedom to choose where we work, live, believe, and who we want to represent us. We want those blessings of liberty to be secured. We have that freedom. And we want that to be secured even in how we treat others. We cannot interfere with what happens to our neighbors across the street. We want to be able to make sure that rights are protected. And finally, to ourselves and our posterity, all that part is saying we want these blessings of freedom and liberty to be secure for our descendants as well, for you and I, not just the founders.